The galaxy has a strange habit of laughing at the people it fears most later. The morning sun poured through the transparent dome of the Galactic Alliance Academy, casting rivers of golden light across a training arena nearly half a mile wide. Steel platforms rose and descended with quiet mechanical precision, while holographic scoreboards shimmered above thousands of spectators gathered for the annual aptitude trials. Young cadets from more than 40 civilizations stood shoulder to shoulder along the edge of the field, each wearing the dark blue academy uniform that marked them as the brightest students their worlds could offer. Some were over 7 feet tall with broad, armored frames. Others possessed 4 powerful arms or dense crystalline bodies capable of lifting incredible weight. Every conversation carried the same mixture of confidence and nervous excitement. Today would determine who deserved to remain at the academy. A loud electronic tone echoed through the stadium as another cadet completed the strength course. Massive alloy cylinders weighing nearly 600 pounds rose smoothly above his shoulders before locking into place. Cheers erupted across the viewing stands. The scoreboard flashed another high score, while instructors quietly entered new rankings into their data tablets. Next candidate, the central announcer called. A brief silence settled over the arena before a small figure stepped onto the platform. Nira adjusted the sleeves of her academy uniform as she walked toward the starting position. She was barely 5 feet tall, her slender frame almost disappearing beside the towering lifting apparatus. Her amethyst-purple skin reflected the morning light with a soft metallic glow, while long silver hair rested neatly over one shoulder. The delicate silver markings along both temples shimmered faintly beneath the transparent dome, tracing elegant patterns toward her elongated ears. Her violet eyes, marked by unusual vertical hexagonal pupils, remained focused on the challenge waiting ahead instead of the crowd surrounding her. Then the laughter began. It started quietly from one group of cadets near the front row before spreading across the arena in waves. A tall reptilian student folded his arms and shook his head. She cannot even reach the top handle. Another cadet smiled without trying to hide it. Maybe they brought the wrong equipment. More voices joined the chorus. None of them shouted insults. They simply laughed as though the outcome had already been decided. Nira heard every word. She kept walking anyway. High above the arena, instructors observed from an elevated command deck overlooking the entire facility. Most reviewed statistics displayed across floating holographic screens. One instructor, however, never looked away from the small alien crossing the field below. Ryan Walker leaned quietly against the observation rail, his gray training uniform still carrying faint dust from the obstacle course he had inspected earlier that morning. At 37, the former survival specialist had spent years teaching cadets that the most dangerous mistake in any mission was judging a teammate before understanding them. He watched as Nira stopped before the lifting platform and quietly measured the distance between her hands and the oversized control grips. She did not look frightened. She looked thoughtful. Ryan noticed something none of the others seemed interested in seeing. While every powerful cadet had stared only at the heavy weights, Nira's eyes moved across the locking mechanisms, balance supports, and center of gravity indicators surrounding the machine. She was studying it before touching it. The central timer activated with a sharp electronic beep. Nira placed both hands on the polished handles and slowly inhaled. Around her, scattered laughter continued drifting through the stands like background noise carried by the wind. Ryan folded his arms, saying nothing. The chief examiner beside him glanced toward the arena and smiled politely. She will not last 30 seconds. Ryan kept watching the young alien below without changing his expression. Maybe, he answered quietly. Or maybe everyone here is measuring the wrong kind of strength. At that exact moment, the massive platform released its hydraulic locks with a deep metallic rumble that echoed across the entire academy, and every eye in the stadium turned toward the smallest cadet standing completely alone at the center of the arena. The hydraulic platform locked into its testing position with a deep metallic clang that echoed beneath the enormous, transparent dome. Thousands of eyes remained fixed on Nira as the 600-pound resistance frame waited silently before her. She tightened both hands around the oversized grips and shifted her footing exactly as she had practiced during countless lonely evenings after everyone else had gone back to their dormitories. The timer above the arena began counting down. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. The platform barely moved. A ripple of laughter rolled through the stadium once again. Someone in the upper seats clapped sarcastically. Another cadet leaned toward his classmate and whispered loudly enough for nearby rows to hear. I think the machine weighs more than she does. Nira heard every word. Her cheeks warmed beneath her amethyst skin, but she refused to release the handles. She adjusted her stance instead, studying the movement of the support arms and the subtle vibration traveling through the lifting mechanism. The machine did not resist evenly. Most cadets had attacked it with raw strength. She watched its rhythm. Finally, she let go. The heavy platform settled back into place with a dull mechanical thump. The scoreboard flashed a red failure symbol. The electronic announcer calmly recorded the result before calling the next participant. The applause that followed was polite rather than encouraging. It sounded less like respect and more like relief that the spectacle had ended. Nira quietly stepped away from the platform without arguing or making excuses. She lowered her head and walked toward the equipment corridor behind the arena while another towering cadet confidently took her place. Above the field, Ryan continued watching until she disappeared through the maintenance doorway. The chief examiner folded his data tablet shut with a satisfied nod. That confirms it, he said. She simply lacks the physical requirements. Ryan looked down toward the empty platform where another powerful student was already preparing to lift the same machine. Does she? He asked calmly. The examiner frowned. You saw the result. Ryan nodded once. I saw one result. He turned away from the observation deck before the examiner could answer. The equipment corridor behind the arena smelled of machine lubricant, warm hydraulic fluid, and freshly polished alloy flooring. Maintenance drones floated quietly between storage lockers while technicians recalibrated training equipment for the next evaluation. Nira sat alone on a narrow metal bench, carefully removing her academy gloves one finger at a time. She stared silently at the small calluses forming across her palms as though searching for an explanation they could not provide. A pair of cadets walked past the corridor entrance. One glanced toward her before quietly shaking his head. Wrong academy, he muttered before disappearing around the corner. Nira remained seated. She had heard worse. Soft footsteps approached from the opposite direction. Ryan stopped a few feet away without speaking immediately. Instead, he bent down and picked up one of her training gloves lying beneath the bench. He brushed away a thin layer of metallic dust before holding it out to her. You dropped this. Nira accepted it with quiet embarrassment. Thank you. Ryan leaned casually against the nearby storage cabinet. Everyone left pretty quickly. She forced a small smile. There was not much reason to stay. Ryan glanced toward the arena where another wave of cheering echoed through the walls. I disagree. She looked up, surprised. You do? He nodded. I think everyone in that stadium measured the wrong thing today. Nira studied his face carefully, expecting encouragement offered out of sympathy. She found none. His expression remained thoughtful rather than comforting. I failed, she said simply. Ryan smiled faintly. You failed one test. She folded her gloves carefully before placing them into her locker. The score says otherwise. Ryan walked toward the lifting platform's maintenance display visible through the open service doorway. Numbers, pressure graphs, and mechanical diagnostics scrolled steadily across the screen. He pointed quietly at one section of the readout. Tell me something. Nira stepped beside him. What? He nodded toward the machine. Before you touched it, what were you looking at? She hesitated. The balance joints. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Anything else? The hydraulic timing. He waited. The center of gravity shifts after the first 6 inches. Ryan's faint smile grew just a little wider. Around them, the cheers from the arena continued growing louder. Neither of them paid any attention. For the first time that day, someone had finally asked Nira not how strong she was, but how she thought. Ryan did not close the maintenance display immediately. Instead, he expanded the engineering diagnostics until dozens of technical graphs filled the screen. Hydraulic pressure curves, balance calculations, force distribution maps, and actuator timing scrolled across the transparent panel in neat columns of glowing blue text. Most cadets would have walked away after seeing so many numbers. Nira stepped closer. Her violet eyes moved rapidly across the information while the faint silver markings along her temples brightened almost imperceptibly. Ryan noticed it at once. What do you see? He asked. She studied the diagrams for another few seconds before answering. The left stabilizer activates 1/10 of a second earlier than the right. Ryan nodded once. Go on. She pointed toward another graph. That shifts the center of resistance before the weight actually begins moving. Her finger followed a thin yellow line across the display. The stronger students compensate without realizing it because they overpower the imbalance. Ryan folded his arms, saying nothing. Someone my size cannot. She looked back at him with quiet uncertainty. That is why I stopped. Ryan smiled. Not because you were weak. Neera slowly shook her head. Because the machine expected everyone to solve the same problem the same way. The instructor pressed one button, and the maintenance panel displayed a hidden engineering note written by the Academy technicians months earlier. Calibration offset pending replacement. Ryan stepped aside so she could read it herself. Her eyes widened. It really was misaligned. Only slightly. Ryan looked toward the arena beyond the service corridor where another roar of applause echoed through the walls. Most people never noticed. Neera stared silently at the glowing words on the screen. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she questioned something that had quietly followed her for years. Maybe every failure had not come from lacking strength. Maybe she had simply been solving different problems than everyone else. Ryan powered down the maintenance panel and motioned toward a side hallway leading away from the crowded arena. Walk with me. They followed a quiet corridor lined with training rooms, simulation chambers, and observation windows overlooking obstacle courses spread across the enormous campus. Outside, cadets climbed walls, crossed suspended bridges, and navigated complex mechanical puzzles under the watchful eyes of instructors. Everywhere they looked, students competed to finish first. Ryan eventually stopped before an unused classroom where dozens of small holographic drones floated silently in charging stations. Do you know why I became an instructor? He asked. Neera shook her head. Because I failed my first survival assessment. She looked at him in disbelief. Ryan laughed softly. Spectacularly. He picked up one of the inactive drones from a workbench. I was stronger than most of my class. Faster too. But I kept trying to force every solution. He gently spun the small drone in his hand. One instructor told me something I never forgot. Neera waited quietly. He said survival belongs to the person who notices what everyone else ignores. Ryan placed the drone back onto its charging pad before looking directly at her. That is exactly what you did with the lifting platform. She lowered her eyes. It still did not change my score. No. His voice remained calm. But it changed my opinion. Before she could answer, two cadets passed the open classroom door. One recognized Neera and whispered to the other with a quiet smile. There is the girl who could not even move the platform. Their footsteps faded down the corridor, followed by restrained laughter. Neera instinctively looked toward the floor again. Ryan did not react to the comment. Instead, he picked up a small metallic training sphere from the shelf and gently tossed it toward her without warning. Neera caught it instinctively before it reached the ground. Ryan smiled. You did not think. She blinked. No, you observed. He picked up a second sphere and tossed it from behind her shoulder. She turned, catching that one just as easily. Then a third, then a fourth from another angle. Every time, her hands moved before conscious thought. Ryan watched carefully as each catch became smoother than the last. Finally, he folded his arms again. Everyone out there keeps measuring how much weight you can lift. Neera looked down at the training sphere resting in her hand. Ryan's smile carried quiet certainty. I think they have completely overlooked the strongest part of you. The following morning began long before sunrise painted the academy dome with soft shades of gold and blue. Most cadets were still asleep when Ryan unlocked a quiet auxiliary training hall hidden behind the primary simulation complex. The room was much smaller than the main arena, with smooth alloy flooring, adjustable obstacle modules, suspended sensor drones, and walls covered with tactical projection panels instead of scoreboards. There were no spectators, no applause, no laughter, only the gentle hum of ventilation fans and the faint clicking of machines completing their morning diagnostics. Neera stepped inside carrying her academy gloves, looking around with cautious curiosity. I have never been in this room, she admitted. Ryan placed a compact training drone onto the center platform before activating its systems. Tiny blue lights awakened one by one across its polished surface. Most cadets never are. She glanced toward the obstacle course. Why bring me here? Ryan smiled as he adjusted several holographic settings. Because this room measures something different. A soft electronic tone echoed through the chamber. 5 small drones quietly lifted into the air, hovering several feet above the floor before spreading into a loose circle around Nira. None carried weapons. None posed danger. They simply floated with remarkable stability, waiting for instructions. Ryan folded his arms. Do not chase them. Nira frowned slightly. Then what should I do? Watch. The drones suddenly accelerated in different directions. They crossed paths, circled one another, changed altitude, and disappeared briefly behind moving holographic barriers before reappearing from unexpected angles. Nira instinctively turned to follow them. Within seconds, she had already lost track of 2. Ryan calmly deactivated the exercise. Again, the second attempt lasted longer. This time she noticed repeating flight patterns before they vanished. By the 5th attempt, she began predicting where each drone would appear instead of reacting after it moved. Ryan watched quietly without interrupting. Nearly an hour passed before he finally nodded with quiet satisfaction. There it is. Nira lowered her hands, breathing slightly faster than before. What? Ryan walked toward one of the suspended tactical displays and replayed her eye movements recorded during the exercise. Thin green lines traced every direction she had looked. Unlike every previous cadet, her gaze never remained fixed on a single target. It constantly scanned the entire environment, identifying movement before it fully developed. Your eyes do not chase motion, Ryan explained. They anticipate it. Nira studied the projection in disbelief. I did not know I was doing that. Most gifts work that way. He smiled gently. The person who has them rarely notices first. The Academy's morning announcement echoed faintly through the distant hallways, signaling the beginning of another day of official evaluations. Outside the training room, dozens of cadets hurried toward the main arena, laughing and comparing yesterday's scores. Ryan powered down the holographic display before reaching into a nearby equipment locker. He removed a lightweight navigation sphere no larger than a baseball and handed it to Nira. Catch. She reached forward without thinking. The sphere landed softly in her palm. Ryan immediately threw another from a completely different angle. Then another. Soon several automated launchers hidden along the walls began releasing dozens of identical spheres in unpredictable directions. Nira never rushed. She simply watched. Her hands moved with quiet precision, catching nearly every sphere before it reached the floor. Ryan checked the performance monitor. 98% successful interception. No Academy record even approached that number. At that exact moment, the training room door slid open. 2 senior instructors stepped inside after hearing the repeated activation alarms. They stopped immediately upon seeing hundreds of training spheres resting neatly in Nira's arms, while the automated launchers completed another impossible sequence. One instructor quietly raised an eyebrow. How long has she been practicing this? Ryan glanced toward Nira before answering with complete calm. About 45 minutes. Neither instructor spoke. They simply looked from the performance monitor back to the smallest cadet in the academy. For the first time since arriving at the Galactic Alliance Academy, the room around Nira became completely silent, not because people had run out of reasons to laugh, but because they had finally discovered a reason to pay attention. 3 days later, the Academy announced an unplanned field assessment, and the atmosphere across the campus changed almost instantly. The usual conversations about rankings and strength tests disappeared, replaced by quiet anticipation as every cadet assembled inside the massive simulation command center before sunrise. Giant holographic projectors stretched from floor to ceiling, displaying an unfamiliar terrain that looked nothing like the controlled training arenas they had practiced in before. Towering rock formations, deep ravines, unstable bridges, abandoned research stations, and shifting energy storms covered nearly 20 square miles of simulated wilderness. Above the projection floated one simple instruction: recover the emergency beacon before sunset. Ryan stood near the instructor's platform with a digital tablet in one hand while the academy director addressed the students. This exercise is designed to evaluate leadership, observation, teamwork, and decision-making under pressure. His voice echoed calmly through the enormous chamber. Strength alone will not determine success. Several cadets exchanged confident smiles anyway. They had already decided physical ability would solve most problems. Teams were assigned randomly. Nira found herself standing beside 3 of the same students who had laughed during the lifting assessment earlier that week. None looked pleased by the assignment. A tall reptilian cadet crossed his arms. "Try not to slow us down." Another quietly sighed before adjusting his equipment belt. Nira simply nodded without responding. She had become used to beginning every challenge with doubt directed toward her instead of the task itself. Minutes later, the simulation gates opened, and dozens of teams entered the artificial landscape beneath a brilliant blue sky projected across the dome overhead. Wind generators carried the scent of pine trees and damp stone through hidden ventilation systems, making the environment feel remarkably real. Ryan observed everything from the elevated control room, where instructors monitored hundreds of live camera feeds simultaneously. He noticed what many others overlooked almost immediately. Every powerful team sprinted toward the shortest visible route leading across a narrow suspension bridge. Nira slowed her pace after only a few hundred feet. She glanced toward distant cliffs instead of the obvious trail ahead. One teammate looked back impatiently. "Come on." Nira continued studying the landscape. "Listen." He frowned. "To what?" She remained still. Beneath the distant sound of rushing water and moving wind, another rhythm echoed softly through the valley. "Metal," repeating every few seconds. Ryan watched the sensor feed closely. Nira's head turned slightly toward the source before she quietly spoke again. "There is machinery operating somewhere under the eastern ridge." Her teammates exchanged uncertain looks. The reptilian cadet shook his head. "The beacon is west." Nira looked toward the bridge now crowded with nearly every other team. "Everyone thinks that." Without waiting for agreement, she knelt beside the trail and gently brushed away a layer of loose gravel. Hidden beneath it lay faint parallel grooves pressed into the ground. Vehicle tracks, old, but still visible. Ryan smiled to himself inside the observation room. None of the overhead drones had even zoomed in that far. One instructor beside him looked surprised. "She noticed those from 20 feet away?" Ryan quietly nodded. She notices patterns before she notices conclusions. Down below, Nira stood and pointed toward a narrow path winding between rock formations almost completely hidden by thick vegetation. Maintenance vehicles used this route. The taller cadet hesitated. "How do you know?" She pointed toward the cliff wall, where faded yellow guidance markers remained barely visible beneath moss and dust. "Because whoever built this place expected machines to climb that way instead of crossing the bridge." At that exact moment, a loud warning tone echoed across the simulation valley. The suspension bridge in the distance automatically retracted as part of the exercise, leaving dozens of teams stranded on the opposite side with no immediate route forward. Confused voices filled the communication channels while instructors quietly recorded each reaction. Nira's teammates slowly turned toward her. For the first time since arriving at the academy, no one laughed. They simply waited to hear where she believed they should go next. The hidden maintenance trail wound quietly through the artificial wilderness, sheltered beneath towering cliffs that blocked both the morning sun and the attention of nearly every other team. Moss-covered service markers appeared every few hundred feet, almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. Nira moved at the front now, not because anyone officially placed her there, but because no one else seemed able to see what she saw. Every few steps she paused, studying tiny details scattered across the simulated environment. A bent branch, fresh scrape marks along a weathered support beam, fine dust collecting against the edge of an old maintenance hatch. None of it seemed important by itself. Together, the clues formed a map. The reptilian cadet who had mocked her only days earlier quietly walked beside her instead of ahead. "How do you keep finding these things?" he finally asked. Nira smiled faintly without taking her eyes off the trail. "I stopped trying to find the path." He looked confused. "Then what are you following?" She gently touched one of the faded yellow symbols painted onto the rock wall. "The people who built this place left answers everywhere. Most of us only look for shortcuts." Above the valley, Ryan watched the team's progress through a network of floating observation drones. Around him, instructors continued monitoring dozens of struggling groups trapped by collapsed bridges, blocked tunnels, and changing terrain. The academy director quietly approached his station, arms folded as he reviewed the live tactical map. Her team is now leading the exercise, he observed. Ryan nodded without looking away from the display. They started in last place. The director smiled thoughtfully. Interesting how quickly that changed once someone began paying attention instead of competing. Nearly an hour later, the hidden maintenance trail opened into a forgotten service courtyard surrounding an abandoned communications tower. The emergency beacon rested on a raised platform at its center, still inactive but fully intact. None of the other teams had reached the location yet. They had all continued searching the obvious routes, while Nira quietly followed the invisible one. Her teammates stared at the beacon in disbelief. "We actually found it," one whispered. Before anyone could celebrate, a new announcement echoed across the simulation. Final challenge activated. The ground vibrated gently beneath their boots as sections of the communications tower slowly shifted into a new configuration. Several access platforms locked into place, while a complicated network of energy conduits illuminated across the structure. A glowing control panel appeared beside the beacon, displaying a complex sequence of alien engineering symbols. The reptilian cadet stepped forward confidently. "I will activate it." He touched the first control. A sharp warning tone immediately sounded. Red lights flashed across the tower. "Incorrect configuration," the system announced. Another cadet tried a different sequence with the same result. Ryan watched silently from the control room. The academy director glanced toward him. "Do you already know who solves this?" Ryan smiled, but said nothing. Nira slowly approached the control panel. Instead of pressing anything, she crouched beside the base of the tower and studied the energy conduits running beneath the platform. Her violet eyes followed each glowing line until they disappeared behind the outer support columns. Then she looked upward. The same hexagonal pattern repeated across the entire structure, matching the unusual shape of her own pupils. She quietly traced the sequence in the air before touching the controls only once. Every warning light immediately disappeared. Soft blue illumination spread through the communications tower, while the emergency beacon awakened with a clear harmonic tone that echoed across the valley. Above the academy, the massive holographic scoreboard instantly updated. Team 7. First place. Complete silence filled the control room before every instructor slowly stood to their feet. No one applauded at first. They simply watched the smallest cadet in the academy accomplish what dozens of stronger students had overlooked. Ryan quietly folded his arms, the faintest smile crossing his face. He had never been trying to prove that Nero was stronger than everyone else. He had only hoped the rest of the galaxy would finally stop confusing strength with size. When Team 7 returned to the academy, the afternoon sun had begun lowering behind the transparent dome, filling the enormous campus with warm amber light that reflected across polished towers and quiet training fields. The simulation officially ended the moment the emergency beacon transmitted its success signal, yet the atmosphere felt completely different from the one that had existed only a few hours earlier. The same cadets who had laughed during the strength assessment now watched Nira as she walked through the central courtyard carrying her equipment bag over one shoulder. Nobody laughed. Some nodded politely as she passed. Others simply stepped aside without saying a word. Respect had arrived quietly, almost awkwardly, as though everyone realized they had overlooked something obvious from the very beginning. Inside the academy evaluation chamber, instructors gathered around a circular conference table where holographic recordings from every team floated above the polished surface. The academy director replayed several key moments from the field exercise. Powerful cadets forcing blocked pathways, teams arguing over leadership, groups rushing toward the shortest route only to become trapped by changing terrain. Then the recording shifted to Nira kneeling beside faint maintenance tracks nearly invisible beneath loose gravel. The room fell silent once again. One senior instructor adjusted the playback speed. "Pause here." The image froze. She noticed vehicle grooves less than half an inch deep from nearly 20 feet away. Another instructor expanded the visual analysis. Then she identified an abandoned maintenance route no reconnaissance drone highlighted. Ryan remained seated near the far end of the table, quietly watching the discussion unfold. The academy director finally looked toward him. "You saw this before anyone else." Ryan smiled modestly. "No." Several instructors looked surprised. "She showed it first." The director leaned back thoughtfully. "Then why did nobody else recognize it?" Ryan glanced toward the paused recording where Nira remained kneeling beside the forgotten trail. Because everyone was measuring how much force she could produce. His voice remained calm. Nobody measured how much she could perceive. The meeting ended with a unanimous decision. Beginning next semester, the Academy would redesign its evaluation program. Observation, adaptability, environmental awareness, and pattern recognition would become equal to physical performance instead of secondary considerations. No announcement celebrated the change. No one publicly admitted the previous system had overlooked students like Nira. The Academy simply became a little wiser than it had been the week before. Meanwhile, Nira quietly returned to the auxiliary training room before dinner. The suspended drones rested silently inside their charging stations exactly where Ryan had left them that morning. She placed the small navigation sphere back onto the equipment shelf before noticing a folded note resting beside it. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was simple. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Same room. We are only getting started. Ryan. A gentle smile crossed her face. Moments later, the classroom door opened. Ryan stepped inside carrying 2 cups of warm herbal tea from the faculty lounge. He handed one to Nira without saying anything. They stood together beside the observation window overlooking the academy grounds where hundreds of cadets crossed the campus beneath the fading evening light. After several quiet minutes, Nira finally spoke. Do you think they believe in me now? Ryan looked outside instead of answering immediately. Some do. She lowered her eyes slightly. And the others? He smiled gently. That is not the important question anymore. She glanced back toward him. Ryan lifted his cup before speaking softly. The important question is whether you have finally started believing in yourself. Nira remained completely still. She thought about the lifting platform, the hidden maintenance trail, the communication tower, and every moment someone had expected her to fail before she even began. Then she remembered one instructor who never laughed, never pitied her, and never asked her to become someone else. Slowly, almost without realizing it, she nodded. Outside the academy, the evening sky filled with the first stars appearing above the transparent dome, while inside the quiet training room, confidence began growing in a place where doubt had lived for far too long. Weeks passed, and the academy slowly settled into a new rhythm that felt almost invisible unless someone had been there before the change began. The same training fields echoed with morning drills, the same classrooms filled with tactical lectures, and the same holographic arenas challenged cadets from every corner of the galaxy. Yet something subtle had shifted. Students no longer measured one another only by size or strength. They had seen with their own eyes that victory could begin with observation instead of power. Nira noticed it in the smallest moments. A cadet now asked for her opinion before entering a simulation. Another quietly thanked her for explaining an environmental pattern hidden inside a navigation exercise. Even the reptilian student who had once laughed the loudest now greeted her every morning with a respectful nod before taking his place in formation. Ryan never mentioned any of it. He simply continued unlocking the auxiliary training room before sunrise, placing the navigation spheres on the workbench exactly as he always had. Their sessions grew more demanding each week. Instead of lifting heavier equipment, Ryan filled entire rooms with moving drones, shifting holographic walls, changing gravity fields, and hundreds of overlapping visual cues. At first, the exercises overwhelmed even Nira's extraordinary perception. Then something remarkable happened. She stopped trying to react to movement. She began predicting it. During one advanced simulation, 50 autonomous drones crossed the room simultaneously, while artificial weather generators created heavy rain, strong crosswinds, and fluctuating visibility. Most cadets would have struggled to identify even half the targets. Nira calmly stood in the center of the room, her glowing violet eyes moving only slightly as she tracked every pattern surrounding her. Ryan watched the performance monitor without speaking. One by one, every predicted flight path appeared exactly where she had anticipated. The system concluded the exercise with a soft electronic chime. Predictive accuracy, 99.3%. A record no Academy student had ever achieved. The instructors reviewing the data remained silent for several moments before one quietly remarked, "We have been calling this a weakness because we never designed a test capable of seeing it." Ryan simply smiled. "Talent rarely changes," he replied. "Only our ability to recognize it does." News of Nira's performance spread quickly throughout the academy. Visiting instructors from allied worlds requested permission to observe her training methods. Engineering departments became interested in the way she interpreted structural balance. Navigation specialists invited her to analyze complex star charts that challenged experienced pilots. For the first time since arriving at the academy, people no longer introduced her as the smallest cadet. They introduced her as the one who noticed what everyone else missed. Late one afternoon, after another successful training session, Ryan and Nira walked quietly across the observation gardens overlooking the academy lake. The surface of the water reflected the transparent dome above them, where cargo ships crossed slowly beneath the evening sky. Soft lights illuminated winding stone paths between flowering alien trees whose silver leaves shimmered whenever a gentle breeze passed through them. Nira stopped beside the railing and watched several first-year cadets practicing orientation drills on the opposite shore. One tiny student stood several feet behind the rest, obviously struggling to keep up. The others occasionally looked back with the same doubtful expressions Nira remembered far too well. She remained silent until Ryan noticed where she was looking. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Nira smiled softly. "I think someone should stay after practice tomorrow." Ryan looked at her without saying anything. She continued watching the young cadet across the lake. "I remember what it felt like when one person believed I was more than my score." Ryan folded his arms comfortably against the railing. "And now?" Nira turned toward him, quiet confidence replacing the uncertainty that had once filled every conversation. "Now I think it is my turn to become that person for someone else." Ryan never answered aloud. He simply looked toward the fading sunlight reflected across the peaceful water and realized that the greatest lesson Nira had learned was never hidden inside a training manual or a simulation. True strength was not measured by how far someone could rise. It was measured by how many others they chose to lift with them. Graduation day arrived beneath a cloudless sky visible through the academy's immense transparent dome, where sunlight poured across polished stone walkways and shimmering towers dressed with the banners of dozens of allied civilizations. Families, diplomats, instructors, and cadets filled the grand assembly plaza, their conversations blending with the gentle sound of ceremonial music carried through the warm morning air. Hundreds of graduates stood in perfect formation wearing dark blue academy uniforms trimmed with silver, each one waiting for the final recognition that would begin the next chapter of their lives. Ryan stood quietly near the back of the instructor's platform, holding a simple data tablet instead of standing beneath the central spotlight. He had never cared much for ceremonies. Watching students succeed had always been enough. One by one, names echoed across the plaza as graduates stepped forward to receive their academy insignias. Loud applause greeted celebrated athletes, elite tacticians, and decorated pilots. Then the academy director paused before reading the final citation. His expression softened into a quiet smile. This year's highest distinction is awarded not for the greatest physical strength, nor the fastest completion time, but for demonstrating exceptional observation, leadership, adaptability, and the ability to inspire others. The enormous holographic display above the plaza illuminated with scenes from the field assessment, the forgotten maintenance trail, the hidden communication tower. The moment a small cadet solved the final challenge while stronger competitors searched in the wrong direction. "Cadet Nira." The applause began politely. Then it grew louder. Soon every graduate, every instructor, and every visitor stood to their feet. Nira walked across the stage with the same calm steps she had taken into the strength arena months earlier, but everything else had changed. Her amethyst-purple skin shimmered beneath the sunlight. Her silver hair rested neatly across her shoulders, and the silver markings along her temples glowed softly, with quiet confidence instead of uncertainty. She accepted the academy insignia with both hands before the director spoke one final sentence. "You reminded this academy that true potential is often hidden behind the measurements we forget to question." Nira thanked him with a respectful nod before turning toward the audience. Her eyes searched through hundreds of faces until they found Ryan standing exactly where he always preferred to be, several rows behind everyone else. Without hesitation, she stepped away from the center of the stage. The audience fell silent, watching as she crossed the platform toward the instructors instead of returning to her place. Ryan looked slightly surprised as she stopped before him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nira carefully removed the academy medal hanging around her neck and held it gently in both hands. "You saw my strength before I ever could," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly across the silent plaza. "This belongs to both of us." Ryan smiled warmly, but slowly shook his head. "No." He gently closed her fingers around the medal. "It always belonged to you." Nira looked down at the medal before quietly laughing through grateful tears. Around them, the applause returned, louder than before, not because of the award itself, but because everyone present understood what they were witnessing. The academy had not simply graduated another outstanding cadet. It had learned an important lesson from one. As the ceremony ended, graduates filled the plaza beneath the bright afternoon sky, embracing friends before leaving for assignments scattered across the galaxy. Ryan remained standing beside the observation garden overlooking the academy lake. A few minutes later, he noticed a familiar sight on the opposite shore. A very small first-year cadet struggled alone with a navigation exercise, while several classmates walked ahead without waiting. Before Ryan could take a single step, Nira quietly crossed the bridge toward the young student. She picked up a dropped training sphere, handed it back with an encouraging smile, and sat down beside the child without saying anything at first. Ryan watched from across the water, the corners of his mouth lifting gently. The lesson had continued exactly as he hoped it would. Above the academy, peaceful starships crossed the brilliant blue sky beyond the transparent dome, carrying new explorers toward worlds still waiting to be understood. And somewhere among those countless stars, another young dreamer would one day succeed because someone chose to notice their potential before anyone else did. Sometimes the greatest strength in the universe is not the power to lift the heaviest weight. Sometimes it is simply the courage to become the first person who believes.